Good afternoon. It's warm in here, I know. I'm the opening act for Nelson, Dream, Joan, and Mark for the next 15 minutes. But I'm really grateful to be here at this convening of so many wonderful writers, critics, photographers, journalists, etc. Thank you, Elizabeth Mendez-Berry, my first editor at Vibe magazine back in the day, music editor. Jelani Cobb, thank you so much. Rashid Shabazz of Critical Minded, everyone who helped imagine this and organize it. Just by way of introduction, my name is Jason King. I am Dean of Music at USC. Thank you. Prior to that, for 22 years, was chair and in leadership positions of the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music in New York. Yay. Been working as a journalist, writer, cultural critic, and scholar, writing about hip-hop and other genres for 25 years. So today I'm going to talk about the other Nas, Lil Nas X. I wrote an essay for NPR called Lil Nas X is the boundary-smashing pop revolutionary of 2021. It was published December 28 of that year, meaning almost nobody read it because it came out right before the new year. Jacob Gans, the amazing Jacob Gans at NPR Music, was my editor. I wanted to talk about this essay because looking back at that essay makes me think about Harry Allen. I don't know if Harry's here or in the room in spirit. His recent Twitter or X provocation, he went off on how white male critics occupy key roles in major publications, and even in the 50th anniversary of hip-hop, they act as gatekeepers of hip-hop's legacy in a way that tends to be uninterrogated. So that lack of interrogation is something that has to be addressed and illuminated. To take that a step further, I also think it's important to address the uninterrogated gatekeeping role of heteronormative critics, writers, editors at mainstream publications who have always structured the conversation and been the dominant critical voices on hip-hop. And when I say heteronormativity, I mean the assumption that heterosexuality is the default, it's the center around which everything else revolves. On one hand, you could look at hip-hop as an inherently queer form. The music was structurally built on disco samples and remix innovations created in and for early 70s gay clubs by people like Francis Grasso, Tom Moulton. Or you could look at the sheer volume of bi, lesbian, gay figures rocking the mic on the turntables, operating behind the scenes, particularly I'm thinking of the 1990s, how we had the don't ask, don't tell status of MCs like Queen Latifah, Queen Pen, Missy, etc., blanketing the occasional bolder move like Michelle Indegeocello, Leviticus, some of you might remember, which was played on MTV, Nena Cherry's I Got You Under My Skin, and so many others. Or the fact that the sheer ubiquity of male bonding is a kind of theatrical masculinity in hip-hop. The scholar Andrew Ross once claimed that drag was the thing that linked the gangsta and the diva in the 1990s. So hip-hop music itself was never a welcoming home for queer and trans people to be fully themselves. Just the opposite, if you were non-normative, its homo panic or trans panic could be threatening, diminishing, dehumanizing, even deadly. And that is all the more reason why the voices and critiques of queer critics of color should have been nurtured and centered at mainstream publications. I want to thank all of the amazing pioneers who've done the work, people like Scott Polson Bryant. Is Scott here? Yes. Where's Scott? Yay, just walked in, okay. Ernest Hardy, so many others. I myself was stirred by Dream Hampton's early example of writing on Eazy-E and AIDS in the 1990s. There's certainly been progress over the years, certainly a lot more non-normative folks working today at these publications, but we're still talking about very, very small percentages, and that lack of inclusion has limited the scope of coverage on hip-hop, most notably in the case of what I'd call hip-hop journalism's Africa Bambaataa problem. The failure to address his alleged crimes is it's an especially abject failure in this 50th anniversary year of hip-hop. So I will ask, what would a non-normative hip-hop journalism look like? What role could the installation of more diverse critics, including diverse queer critics of color at publications, play in creating spaces for non-normative hip-hop artists to flourish and to thrive? I'm also thinking of the dearth of critical, smart, thoughtful writing on an entire genre like house music, particularly non-scholarly house music, which itself has its own relationship to hip-hop, and I think it's another casualty of this problem. Okay, on to Lil Nas X. So the reason I wanted to write on Lil Nas X is because I was amazed that Nas had created 2 consecutive cultural explosions in the course of just 3 years. First with Old Town Road in 2018 when it challenged the structural exclusion and double standards of the Billboard charts, and then went on to become one of the top-selling and streaming singles in history. And then he did it again in 2021 with the Montero album, specifically Call Me By Your Name with its catchy flamenco, dembo, electro trap beat, and Pole Dancing for Satan. Y'all remember that? And then Industry Baby with those Bill Conti-style horns and the video in which he's naked, Shawshank Redemption reference, to say nothing of his Montero tour as well. 2021 in so many ways belonged to Lil Nas X. He dominated so many cultural conversations, and he proved himself to be a strategic conceptualist with a digital savvy to genetically engineer chart hits. Yet I saw no comprehensive, thoughtful, mic-dropping work of journalism that accurately conveyed and captured Lil Nas X's impact in his banner year of 2021. Instead, it felt to me more like benign neglect. While he racked up Grammy nominations, he walked away with none, and he was shut out of other award shows, particularly black ones. At the end of 2021, it felt like Nas, to me again, was being written off as a kind of flamboyant figure or a figure of controversy or a marketing wizard rather than a true artist or a creative genius. And that's the same kind of heteronormative dismissal afforded to earlier queer icons like Little Richard, like Sylvester, where their artistry and their innovations have to be rescued decades after the fact. So I got the sense that Nas was not being given his due in real time, and I felt the need, whatever need I could offer, to fulfill that need, to intervene and to try to document the full range of his impact. A few months earlier, a major publication, which I won't name, had asked me to write something on Nas, but gave me a thesis. They gave me a thesis. And they said that Lil Nas X drew his primary source of inspiration from Madonna. And that's what I had to write. So I refused to write that piece, not to say that Madonna wouldn't be a touch point, but I saw Nas as part of a longer lineage of black queer creative genius that included Little Richard Esquerita, Billy Wright, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Billy Preston, Carl Bean, Michelle Ndegeocello, Tone, Shamir, Makonnen, Mickey Blanco, Cakes to Killa, on and on. And given that Nas got his start as a Nicki Minaj barb, superfan, I think we're talking about superfans later, it felt more fitting to recognize Nicki Minaj as a progenitor in terms of her chronically under-recognized cultural influence over the past decade and change. So I walked away from the Rolling Stone gig, just assuming I would have no opportunity that year to write on Nas. And, sorry. And I pitched it instead to NPR, and they gave me the space and the freedom to write a substantial long-form piece, year-end piece. So thank you, Jacob Gans. Thank you to the NPR music team. And I think it might be the only substantial long-form piece that year, certainly, on Lil Nas X. So in the NPR essay, I wrote about the full scale of Lil Nas X's self-ambition, matched to what I saw as his Beyonce-inspired levels of creative execution. He was making blockbuster event pop, full of CGI-enhanced, magic realist imagery in his videos. And I wanted to look at his campy, surreal, absurd, carnivalesque, dreamy, capricious visuals in aesthetic conversation with visual artists like Jacoby Satterwhite and Terrence Nance. I also wanted to position Lil Nas X in the Michael Jackson lineage, in the way that Michael catapulted himself into solo stardom in the 1980s by drawing on then brand new MTV technology. Lil Nas X is a digital native who uses gaming platforms like Roblox and media platforms like Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, and TikTok to promote himself, communicate with fans, and fend off haters. I think of Nas also as a powerful writer as well as a musician. Nobody, including everyone in this room, nobody can compose a clapback tweet as brutally as Lil Nas X. But he's also a writer in the Basquiat sense of tagging, that he has the temerity to inscribe himself into a dominant establishment culture that feeds off the negation of queer, non-normative people of color. The work that hip-hop journalists can do, I always believe, is to offer context, given that we're in an era ironically marked by two things. One, information glut, just too much information, and on the other hand, the decontextualization of that same information. So I wanted to write about Nas as the leading Gen Z figure of his time. He was born in 1999. It's the same year that The Matrix came out, and the Wachowskis made that film about dismantling the binary and making people self-aware of the hidden structures that control them. In Nas plays, I think, in that same sandbox of themes, and I liken Nas to Keanu Reeves' Neo, the everyday hacker who finds faith in his own abilities to salvage humanity simply by coming into his self. So when Nas sings that hook on Industry Baby, I Got What You Waiting For, it reminded me of Morpheus's line about Neo in The Matrix. He's the one we've been waiting for. He's beginning to believe, to walk the path. It felt like Nas was finding self-faith and walking the path in 2021. So in many ways, to me, Nas was a kind of literal superhero, saving lives by making an interventionist hip hop that affirmed LGBT people's right to exist in an establishment culture. Lil Nas X's example of standing up for who you are seemed especially important in that cultural and political context. I also love the fact that he seemed to be refusing the ethos that was so much a part of Old Town Road's 2018, 2019 reception, which was this sort of kumbaya, can't we all get along spirit. In 2019, Nas, I think, had become a sort of human bridge across cultural differences, black and white, country and hip hop. So he's a kind of cultural reconciliator of those differences because it was such a contentious political era marked by all this partisanship and polarization. What was fascinating to me is that in 2021, Lil Nas X rejected all of that in favor of making not safe for work hip hop. And that vision of hip hop held power, not through its kind of universal appeal, but instead he insisted on the specificity and the particularity of black gay experience and the normalization of same-sex pleasure, lust, and kink. I think we have to remember in the future how filthy the Montero album is in the videos. And it immediately, to me, made him different than queer icons of the past, like Luther Vandross, George Michael, and so on, who were ultimately defined and circumscribed by their closets. Lil Nas X was making music videos and lyrics in which you had rare, mainstream images of black men desiring, holding, kissing, having sex with other black men, which even separates him from critical darlings like Frank Ocean or Steve Lacy or Tyler, who could never. I think of Lil Nas X performing a radical act of performing himself, but also performing what the filmmaker Marlon Riggs once described as the revolutionary act of black men loving black men. And Nas is doing this against a history of black LGBT communities who've been scarred by intersectional forces of racism, homophobia, transphobia, and AIDS. So what I wanted to do in this piece was write about Nas as a figure who marks a kind of generational shift, who embodies Gen Z's mix of audacious self-assertion, being self-aware to epic degrees, and also this oversharing is political confessionalism. So Nas took a huge risk by following up Old Town Road with his starkly confessional album that centered his personal autobiography and his sex life. And even his insistence on his own femme beauty and fabulousness, I think of as a kind of radical political activism of the self. So I'll just sort of end with a couple of quotes from the piece itself. I wrote, Lil Nas X is not trying to make pop music meant to flatter white people or to center them. In contrast to crossover pop of the past, where black performers had to court and kowtow to whites to secure a place on the charts, Lil Nas X does not need to compromise or shrink his blackness, his southernness, his ratchetness, or his gayness to rack up impressions or streaming numbers. And then another section I say, Lil Nas X's capacious understanding that there is more than one way to be a black man, along with his decentering of the white gaze, G-A-Z-E, and white gays, G-A-Y-S, and his skewering of the religious right's bogus terms of evil and damnation, mean that he grabbed the brass ring. So here, I'm referencing James Baldwin, who in the book, The Price of the Ticket, or an article from Playboy magazine, actually from 1985, that's reprinted in that book, said that Michael Jackson had grabbed the brass ring of mainstream success, and he would pay a swift price for doing so. Very prescient. That might be true of Lil Nas X as well. Certainly he's experienced a recent stumble with his Max documentary, which didn't do the numbers I think they thought it would, and his new single, J. Christ, which has failed to top the charts. It may be a sign that he's internalized the backlash, internalized the normativity, but so many hip hop and pop artists are still drawing from the Lil Nas X playbook. I don't think Beyonce's renaissance could have existed outside of the work that Lil Nas X did in creating space. And he also was influenced by her, of course, as well, thinking of songs like Daddy Lessons that opened up space for him to do Old Town Road. But also thinking of Sam Smith, literally just copying the playbook, Doja Cat, and others. I like to think of Lil Nas X as an inconvenient reminder that having critics, and even critics of color, in the staff room is not enough, that you actually need a plurality of perspectives and experiences, and people with the power and the access to set the agenda and to define the conversation to truly represent the plurality that is hip hop. Thank you.